I was circumcised, as were the majority of kids in the United States. By the way, it's not the majority worldwide.
No.
It is in our society in the United States. Worldwide, it's about 60% worldwide or less.
No, 60% currently being circumcised in this country.
Right. Worldwide is 60% uncircumcised.
No, 85% worldwide.
Woo.
85% of the men in the world are intact.
I'm not mad. I'm not mad at my parents for making that decision. Maybe they made the best decision. Maybe they didn't even think about it. Maybe this was just tradition. Maybe it's something they did.
They may not have been asked.
Yeah, they may not have been asked. I don't look. As I mentioned before, I don't look at myself as a victim. I don't necessarily see myself as mutilated. But given the choice, I would prefer that the procedure had not been done on me. And it's not just about the fact that they removed the most sensitive part of the penis. It's not about any of those factors. Those are important things that I think are worth talking about. My objection is one of rights. I don't see how you can justify altering the body of any human without their consent, without a good medical justification. And the fact of the matter is, there is no good justification for this. The foreskin isn't even retractable, as we talked about earlier, in kids until 5 or 6 years of age. And they've got to do this tearing procedure, and there's another grimace, in order to separate from the glands. Okay, they're an infant. They're not going to remember it. Nonsense. There are studies being... We don't have a good understanding of how really early experiences affect the rest of our lives. There are some studies now that are investigating this about children's pain responses.
Yes.
And how early trauma, including circumcision, which is, by the way, trauma. I mean, it's not like there's almost never anesthesia because that's too dangerous for one thing.
Yeah.
There's definitely pain involved. It's only the most sensitive part of your body. So there's pain, and that creates trauma in an infant. Now, it's possible that this is something they forget. It may be that newborns just can't possibly remember that. But there is evidence that this does affect people's response and reaction to pain.
Yes.
It's not solid. It's not confirmed. I don't want to go out on a limb here and say, oh, my gosh, they're traumatizing kids. Maybe we're traumatizing kids. Maybe we're not. We're doing harm. Is it lasting harm? I'm not sure. What I do know is that there's no medical justification to remove the foreskin of a 1 week or less infant. It's just silly. We need to stop pretending because of traditions. Oh, it's just the best way. They're better off being circumcised, so we're going to go ahead and do it for them now. Well, they're better off without an appendix. Let's do that for them too. Maybe we could cut off the ends of the fingers so they could never get a hangnail. If you sew that stub up right, they still have really good dexterity. I mean, you can play the piano. You wouldn't quite have the reach. But maybe we could do that for them too.
Or we could pull all their teeth because root canals hurt.
Well, of course, they're not going to have teeth at birth. But when those first ones come in, we know they're going to fall out anyway.
Yeah,
and it's going to hurt. You got to tie a string to it and slam the door. So let's just anesthetize them and yank all their teeth out. I don't want to make an argument from absurdity. The point here is that when you're making decisions about what medical procedures to do on somebody, there are a lot of factors to consider. And what I said at the outset is that this is a contentious issue. It's up to the individual. I have here a list of both pros and cons. Yes, we're focusing more on the history and more on the cons. That's, I don't claim to be unbiased in this, but I challenge anybody to say that we're presenting evidence that isn't actually factual. This is stuff we researched, and I'll go with the motto of leave the hoodie on his woody. But anyway, there's 3 callers. I don't want to. Have you got what have you got left that you want to definitely get to? And then
let's talk a little bit about current practices here. As we mentioned, there's no medical association anywhere in the world that recommends routine neonatal circumcision. And approximately 85% of the world's men are intact, which means they've not been cut. Okay. And in fact, in Scandinavian countries, fewer than one man in 17,000 will die without his foreskin. So these claims that you have all these kind of penis problems and stuff and that he's eventually going to need to be circumcised is just nonsense. Because in Scandinavia, they have a very low incidence of any kind of problems, and they just don't do it much there. The worldwide incidence, about 13 million men and boys are circumcised each year. And compare that to about 2 million women and girls who are subjected to female genital mutilation. So clearly, there's a lot more societal acceptance of cutting up men's genitals versus women's genitals, which is not to minimize either of them. One thing I would point out, though, that everywhere that female genital mutilation is practiced, in every case, they also circumcise males. There's no society that cuts women that does not also cut men. So in this country, about 1 million boys are circumcised in the U.S. each year. Whether or not they get any pain relief during the procedure largely depends on what kind of physician does the procedure. Pediatricians are the most likely to use pain relief, followed by family practice physicians, followed by obstetricians. Less than half of obstetricians use any kind of pain relief. And guess who does the most of the circumcisions? Right. So odds are that if your son is circumcised by an OBGYN, they won't get pain relief. And I will say that all of the OBs in the practice that delivered my son, they would use pain relief.
And I think it's also fair to interject here that may be for very good reason. If we were discovered tomorrow that there is a positive medical benefit that is sufficient to justify routine neonatal circumcision, it may be the case that it's also best performed without anesthesia, because anesthesia can be, in giving drugs at all to any newborn, is an extremely tricky process. So the point here isn't that, that we're doing it without anesthesia when we could be. It's the point that we're doing it at all.
Right.
And the anesthesia question is separate. It may be necessary, it may be too hazardous, but why are we doing it at all?
Well, which brings me to this whole position by the American Academy of Pediatrics, and this is their statement on informed consent. Okay, and it says that providers have legal and ethical duties to their child patients to render competent medical care based on what the patient needs, not what someone else expresses. The pediatrician's responsibility to his or her patient exists independently of parental desires or proxy consent. So to me, that suggests that ethically, pediatricians have to refuse non-therapeutic circumcisions.
Yeah.
Because this is just an expression of parental consent, and absent any medical condition, there's no benefit to subject the child to this kind of trauma.
Yeah, it ends up at that. I mean, there may be a medical benefit later, as we mentioned before. At that point, it is essentially cosmetic, because at that point there is no medical justification for it.
And so why it persists? Well, it's a departure from the normal surgical protocol, which includes informed consent, medical necessity, and proof of benefit, none of which are established in the case of neonatal circumcision. And more tellingly, it's a lack of respect for children and their rights. And I think that this is probably an outgrowth of this religious view, primarily a fundamentalist Christian view, that children are property and they're under the control of their parents, and you can do whatever you want with them.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm the let's be fair guy all day today, and not that there's anything wrong with what.
I was going to say that's weird, me being more extreme than you.
Yes, as the guy who's normally the one who's going to get hate mail. The issue here, where you were talking about children as property, this is another thing that makes this such a problem. These are difficult questions. Parents have a responsibility to their kids. They also have rights with regard to their kids. They have rights with regard to how they educate them, what kind of home life they have, within limits that basically, I'm an advocate that you have every right possible until we limit it. And parents have rights and responsibilities with regard to the kid. And there's a really difficult, I don't want to say gray area, but there's a really difficult area where the rights of the parent, the rights of the child, and the rights and the responsibility of the state kind of mesh, and it's difficult to necessarily decide. Now, normally, I think we should err on behalf of freedom until somebody demonstrates actual harm. In this case, I'm not going to be going down to the Capitol and lobbying that we ban, neonatal circumcision. I'm not so